Video 6. Did you know? The Long Hunters, Native and White Families, and the Edge of Revolution. 24 Crazy Facts. Number 1. Did you know? Lone hunters were among the first Americans to map Kentucky and Tennessee.
Men like Daniel Boone, Henry Skaggs, and Caspar Mansker spent months in the wilderness, creating hand-drawn maps of rivers, salt licks, buffalo traces, and mountain passes. Some remained in the wilderness for 6 months or even a year before returning home with valuable furs, detailed knowledge of the frontier, and stories that inspired thousands of settlers to follow. Many frontier legends, including Simon Kenton, were just as remarkable as Daniel Boone. Kenton survived captivity, escaped impossible situations, explored vast stretches of Kentucky and Ohio, and became one of the frontier's greatest scouts and woodsmen. Their knowledge later guided settlers, militia, and even Revolutionary War commanders who relied on frontier scouts.
Number 2. Did you know? Long before the Shawnee, Delaware, Miami, Wyandot, and Mingo lived in the Ohio country. The region was home to advanced ancient civilizations including the Adep and Hopewell and Ford ancient cultures, whose massive earthworks, geometric enclosures, and ceremonial centers still stand today.
The Ohio region contains some of the most sophisticated prehistoric architecture in North America. The Adena, c. 500 BCE, 100 BCE, built large conical burial mounds and developed early ceremonial traditions. The Hopewell, c. 100 BCE, 500 CE, created enormous geometric earthworks, circles, squares, octagons, and parallel embankments, aligned with celestial events and constructed with astonishing precision. Their trade network stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast, bringing copper, obsidian, mica, and shells into Ohio's ceremonial centers. Later, the Fort Ancient people, c. 1000 1650 CE, built towns, plazas, and agricultural villages, including the famous Serpent Mound, one of the largest effigy earthworks in the world. These cultures were not small bands of wanderers. They were organized societies with astronomy, engineering, long-distance trade, and complex ceremonial life. Their earthworks remain visible today, reminders that the Ohio country was a center of ancient innovation long before colonial settlement or the arrival of historic native nations.
Number 3. Did you know? Kentucky and Tennessee were also home to advanced ancient civilizations, including the Mississippian and woodland cultures, whose towns, platformed mounds, plazas, and agricultural systems shaped the region centuries before the Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Shawnee hunted there.
The Kentucky-Tennessee region was part of a vast Mississippian world that flourished from c. 900 1600 CE. These societies built large towns, central plazas, and pyramidal platform mounds used for ceremonies, leadership houses, and religious structures. Sites such as Cahokia, just across the river in Illinois, Mound Bottom in Tennessee, and Angel Mounds in Indiana reveal a civilization with agriculture, astronomy, diplomacy, and regional influence. Earlier woodland cultures also left behind burial mounds, stone box graves, and ceremonial sites across the region. These ancient peoples cultivated maize, beans, and squash, tracked celestial events, and built mound centers that served as political and religious capitals. Their influence shaped the landscape long before historic nations like the Cherokee and Chickasaw arrived. When frontier hunters and settlers entered Kentucky and Tennessee, they walked through a land already marked by centuries of engineering, ceremony, and community life.
Number 4. Did you know? Frontier families played a major role in the Revolution, even though they lived far from major cities.
Their skills in hunting, tracking, and wilderness survival made them exceptional irregular fighters. Many Loyalist officers feared frontier militia more than continental regulars because they fought with precision, stealth, and deadly accuracy.
Number 5. Did you know? The Battle of Kings Mountain was one of the most decisive Patriot victories of the entire Revolutionary War.
In 1780, British Major Patrick Ferguson warned the settlers living west of the Appalachian Mountains that unless they stopped resisting the British, he would cross the mountains, destroy their settlements, and lay waste to the country. Instead of frightening them, his threat united hundreds of frontier volunteers known as the Overmountain Men. They were not professional soldiers but ordinary hunters, farmers, blacksmiths, millers, craftsmen, and frontiersmen who had learned marksmanship and survival in the wilderness. Crossing the mountains themselves, they tracked Ferguson to Kings Mountain in present-day South Carolina. On October 7, 1780, they surrounded his Loyalist force on a wooded ridge and defeated it in little more than an hour. Ferguson was killed, most of his command surrendered, and many historians consider the Battle of Kings Mountain one of the most important turning points of the Revolutionary War. The victory halted British momentum in the South, paved the way for later American victories at Cowpens and Yorktown, and gave new hope to the Patriot cause at a time when many feared the Revolution might be lost. Years later, Thomas Jefferson described Kings Mountain as the joyful annunciation of that turn of the tide of success.
Number 6. Did you know? Frontier survival depended on entire families, not just the famous explorers and hunters.
While many men hunted, explored, or served with local militia, women often became the backbone of frontier life by planting crops, caring for livestock, preserving food, making clothing, raising children, and sometimes defending their homes. Children worked almost as hard as adults, gathering firewood, carrying water, tending animals, helping clear fields, and learning the skills they would need to survive on the frontier. Every member of the family played an essential role, and the success or even survival of a settlement often depended on everyone's hard work.
Number 7. Did you know? Many native nations viewed Kentucky not as empty land, but as a shared hunting ground used by generations of different peoples.
During the 1700s, Kentucky contained few permanent native villages, but it was one of the richest hunting regions in eastern North America. The Shawnee hunted there extensively, while the Cherokee claimed much of the region through earlier conquests and long-standing traditions. The Chickasaw hunted in western Kentucky, and the Delaware, Lenape, Mingo, Wyandot, Huron, Miami, and other nations also traveled, hunted, traded, or claimed interests in parts of the area. These overlapping claims were not always peaceful, and different nations sometimes disputed one another's rights. To many native peoples, however, the land was not unused, simply because few permanent settlements existed. It was an essential source of food, trade, and cultural identity. As increasing numbers of settlers entered Kentucky, many native leaders believed these newcomers were violating long-established understandings, disrupting hunting cycles, and threatening the balance of the region. These conflicting views over land and its use fueled frontier conflicts long before the American Revolution.
Number 8. Did you know? Pontiac's War reshaped the American frontier years before the Revolutionary War and nearly drove the British out of much of the West.
In 1763, after Britain defeated France in the French and Indian War, the Ottawa leader Pontiac helped organize a broad alliance of native nations determined to resist further British expansion into the Great Lakes and Ohio country. Warriors from several nations attacked British forts and settlements across the region, capturing a number of forts and placing others under lengthy siege. Although the British eventually regained control, the conflict demonstrated that native resistance remained powerful, and that the frontier could not be secured by military victory alone. The war convinced British officials to issue the Proclamation Line of 1763, restricting colonial settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains in an effort to prevent further bloodshed. Many colonists bitterly opposed the restriction, while many native nations became even more determined to defend their homelands from expanding settlement. The tensions left by Pontiac's War set the stage for decades of conflict in Kentucky, the Ohio country, and the wider frontier, and became one of the many events that contributed to the growing disagreements between Britain and its American colonies.
Number 9. Did you know? George Rogers Clark helped secure the entire British Northwest without winning large conventional battles, using speed, deception, frontier knowledge, and a daring winter march through flooded wilderness to capture Vincennes and reshape America's future claims to the Northwest Territory.
Clark's Western Campaign was one of the most extraordinary operations of the Revolutionary War. Instead of relying on large armies or formal battlefield tactics, he used the skills he had gained on the frontier: deep knowledge of river systems, native diplomacy, wilderness survival, and the ability to move men quickly across harsh terrain. In 1779, Clark led a small force from Kaskaskia toward Fort Sackville at Vincennes, marching through icy floodwaters that reached their chests. For days, his men waded through freezing swamps with no dry ground, no shelter, and almost no food. Many believed the march was impossible, yet Clark pushed forward, using psychological warfare, surprise, and frontier scouting to convince both British Commander Henry Hamilton and local residents that a much larger army was approaching. When Clark reached Vincennes, he launched a sudden attack that overwhelmed the British garrison. The victory was achieved not through a massive battle, but through audacity, endurance, and strategic brilliance. By capturing Vincennes and securing the Illinois country, Clark prevented Britain from using native alliances to dominate the Ohio Valley and gave the United States a powerful claim to the Northwest Territory during peace negotiations. His campaign ensured that lands stretching to the Mississippi River, including future states like Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin, would become part of the United States rather than remain under British control. Clark's success shows how the Revolution was won not only by formal armies in the East, but also by frontier leaders whose courage and wilderness expertise shaped the map of the early nation.
Number 10. Did you know? Many of the Overmountain Men were descendants of Scots-Irish settlers whose ancestors had spent centuries resisting English rule, and that long memory of struggle helped fuel the fierce independence, deadly marksmanship, and astonishing 300-mile march that led to their victory at Kings Mountain.
The Overmountain Men were not professional soldiers, but frontier farmers, hunters, blacksmiths, and craftsmen, hardened by isolation, danger, and the demands of wilderness life. Many descended from the Scots-Irish, Ulster Scots, a people shaped by generations of conflict with English authority. Their ancestors had lived in the turbulent borderlands of Scotland and England, a region marked by raids, political repression, and constant warfare. In the 1600s, the English crown pushed many of these families into Ulster, where they faced religious discrimination, high rents, economic exploitation, and strict political controls under English landlords. These hardships created a cultural tradition of mistrust towards centralized English power and a fierce commitment to self-reliance. Tens of thousands eventually immigrated to America, settling on the rugged Appalachian frontier where independence was essential for survival. When British Major Patrick Ferguson threatened to lay waste their homes in 1780, Scots-Irish descendants saw the warning as part of an old struggle their families had endured for generations. In response, they gathered their rifles, weapons far more accurate than British smoothbore muskets, and marched over 300 miles in barely 2 weeks, crossing steep ridges and dangerous passes to meet Ferguson at Kings Mountain. Their frontier rifles, capable of hitting targets at long distances in wooded terrain, proved decisive against British troops armed with muskets designed for massed formations. British commanders never believed frontier militia would cross the mountains in force, nor did they expect such deadly precision from backcountry fighters. But the Overmountain Men did both, carrying with them the memory of centuries of resistance and the belief that no distant authority had the right to threaten their homes or their liberty.
Number 11. Did you know? Frontier women and children played essential roles in survival, often defending cabins, running farms, and performing the work that kept entire settlements alive.
Life on the frontier demanded courage and labor from every member of the family. While many men hunted, explored, or served with local militia, women became the backbone of frontier life by planting crops, caring for livestock, preserving food, making clothing, raising children, and sometimes defending their homes during raids. Many became skilled in shooting, tracking, and emergency medicine, making them indispensable during crises. Children worked almost as hard as adults, gathering firewood, carrying water, tending animals, clearing fields, and learning the skills needed to survive in a dangerous and isolated world. Frontier settlements depended on the combined strength of women, men, and children, and the success or even survival of a community often rested on everyone's hard work and resilience.
Number 12. Did you know? The Ohio Country was one of the most fiercely contested regions in North America, claimed at the same time by Britain, France, the American colonies, and multiple native nations such as the Shawnee, Delaware, Lenape, Mingo, Miami, Wyandot, and Ottawa.
Its dense forests, rich hunting grounds, fertile river valleys, and vast trade networks made it a prize that every major power wanted. France built forts to control the waterways, Britain asserted imperial authority through colonial charters, and the American colonies saw the region as the future of westward expansion. But for native nations, including the Shawnee, Delaware, Mingo, Miami, Wyandot, and Ottawa, the Ohio Country was home, a place of villages, hunting grounds, trade routes, and ancestral memory. As settlers crossed the Appalachians in growing numbers, native communities launched raids on frontier cabins and isolated homesteads to defend lands they believed were being taken without consent. Settlers responded with their own retaliatory attacks, creating a cycle of fear and violence that shaped daily life long before the Revolution. These overlapping claims and escalating conflicts helped ignite the French and Indian War and later fueled Revolutionary-era fighting across the backcountry. The Ohio Country was not just a region. It was the flashpoint where empires, settlers, and native nations collided.
Number 13. Did you know? Daniel Boone's adoption by the Shawnee reflected a long-standing native tradition of replacing lost family members, a practice that existed for centuries before Europeans arrived, and one that often involved violent raids, killing, and the forced taking of captives.
When Boone was captured in 1778, he was adopted by Chief Blackfish and given the Shawnee name Sheltowee, meaning big turtle. His adoption fit a cultural tradition shared by several native nations, including the Shawnee, Delaware, Wyandot, Miami, and Haudenosaunee, who sometimes replaced relatives lost to war or disease by adopting captives into their communities. But this tradition must be understood honestly. It was not a benign or gentle practice, nor was it created for dealing with Europeans. For hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, native nations had raided one another, killing enemies, burning villages, and taking captives to replace lost family members, restore balance, or satisfy mourning obligations. When Europeans arrived, they entered a world where this system already existed. Captivity could lead to full adoption and genuine belonging, but it could also result in execution, enslavement, or lifelong separation from one's original family. Boone's experience shows how complex frontier relationships truly were, shaped by grief, cultural tradition, warfare, and the harsh reality that both native nations and settlers were fighting for survival in a world already marked by centuries of conflict.
Number 14. Did you know? The Proclamation Line of 1763 became one of the most ignored laws in British colonial history, and that widespread defiance helped fuel the resentment that eventually led to the Revolutionary War.
After the French and Indian War, Britain attempted to stabilize the frontier by prohibiting settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. The goal was to prevent further conflict with native nations, especially after the violence of Pontiac's War. But thousands of settlers, including long hunters, land speculators, and frontier families, crossed the mountains anyway, believing they had earned the right to expand into the Ohio country. Many saw the Proclamation Line as an unjust barrier imposed by a distant government that neither understood nor cared about frontier life. British officials tried to enforce the law through military patrols, trade restrictions, and threats of punishment, but settlers continued to build cabins, clear fields, and establish new communities beyond the line. This growing defiance convinced many colonists that Britain was restricting their freedom, limiting their opportunities, and siding with native nations against them. By the 1770s, anger over the Proclamation Line had merged with frustrations over taxes, trade controls, and British troops in the colonies, becoming one of several powerful grievances that helped push Americans toward revolution.
Number 15. Did you know? Kentucky was not the homeland of a single native nation, but a vast shared hunting ground used by the Shawnee, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Mingo, Delaware, and several others, and its rich game, buffalo traces, and natural resources made it one of the most valuable regions in eastern North America.
For centuries before settlers arrived, multiple native nations traveled through Kentucky seasonally to hunt the enormous herds of buffalo, elk, white-tailed deer, black bear, turkey, and smaller game that thrived in its forests and grasslands. Buffalo were especially important. Their meat-fed families, their hides became clothing and shelter, and their bones and sinew were used for tools. Even more importantly, buffalo carved deep, wide trails across the landscape as they migrated between salt licks, grazing grounds, and river valleys. These buffalo traces became the earliest highways of the region, used by native hunters long before Europeans arrived, then later followed by long hunters, traders, and eventually thousands of settlers. Because so many nations relied on Kentucky's game and travel routes, the region was a complex web of overlapping claims, seasonal rights, and long-standing traditions. This reality makes the frontier far more complicated than simple settlers versus one tribe stories. Kentucky was a shared resource, a crossroads, and a place where cultures, hunting practices, and territorial expectations collided.
Number 16. Did you know? The Appalachian Mountains acted as both a barrier and a magnet for early settlers. And the Cumberland Gap became the single most important doorway through that massive wall, shaping the entire course of westward expansion long before the Revolution.
The Appalachian Mountains formed one of the greatest natural obstacles in eastern North America. Their steep ridges, dense forests, and narrow valleys slowed movement for decades, keeping most colonial settlement along the Atlantic coast. Yet beyond those mountains lay Kentucky and the Ohio country, regions filled with fertile soil, rich game, salt licks, and vast hunting grounds used for centuries by native nations. This promise of opportunity pulled long hunters, traders, and frontier families westward even when travel was dangerous and technically illegal after the Proclamation Line of 1763. The Cumberland Gap, a narrow break in the mountain chain, became the key to everything. Buffalo had carved deep trails through it over countless generations, creating natural pathways that native nations used for hunting and trade. When Daniel Boone and other long hunters followed those same buffalo traces, they discovered a route that avoided the worst ridges and cliffs. The Gap soon became the primary gateway for thousands of settlers who poured into Kentucky in the years leading up to the Revolution. Its importance was so great that whoever controlled the Gap controlled migration, communication, and military movement across the frontier. In many ways, the Cumberland Gap transformed the Appalachians from an impenetrable barrier into a bridge, one that carried hunters, families, and eventually entire communities into the heart of the American West.
Number 17. Did you know? Though frontier produced leaders who shaped early America, including George Rogers Clark, Simon Kenton, and several others whose mastery of wilderness travel, diplomacy, and native alliances made them indispensable in the Revolution's Western campaigns.
The Western frontier was a proving ground long before the United States existed, and it forged men whose skills were unlike anything found in the formal armies of the East. George Rogers Clark, often called the Conqueror of the Northwest, led daring expeditions through flooded plains, dense forests, and hostile territory to capture British outposts such as Kaskaskia and Vincennes. His victories helped secure the Ohio Valley for the new nation. Simon Kenton, one of the most skilled woodsmen of his era, served as a scout, guide, and fighter, whose knowledge of native trails, river systems, and buffalo traces saved countless lives. Kenton's ability to read the land, and his experience navigating complex relationships with Shawnee, Delaware, and other native nations made him invaluable to frontier militia. These men were part of a larger group of frontier leaders whose abilities came not from formal military training, but from years of hunting, tracking, trading, and surviving in contested lands. They understood native diplomacy, could move silently through wilderness, and knew how to fight in forests and ravines where British regulars struggled. Their contributions were crucial to the Revolution's Western theater, where control of forts, rivers, and alliances determined whether the young nation would expand or collapse. The frontier did not just produce fighters, it produced strategists, scouts, diplomats, and leaders whose skills helped shape the future United States.
Number 18. Did you know? Native religious beliefs in the Ohio region were diverse and not shared uniformly across all nations, with the Shawnee, Delaware, Lenape, Miami, Wyandot, and Mingo, each holding distinct spiritual traditions shaped by their own histories, ceremonies, and relationships with the land.
The Ohio country was home to several native nations, each with its own religious worldview. The Shawnee emphasized balance, sacred responsibility, and the guidance of powerful spiritual beings connected to the natural world. The Delaware, Lenape, practiced a deeply moral religion centered on living in harmony, following the Creator's instructions, and maintaining community purity. The Miami held ceremonies tied to agriculture, hunting, and seasonal cycles, honoring spirits who governed animals, weather, and the land. The Wyandot, Huron, blended ancient traditions with clan-based rituals, emphasizing the power of dreams, visions, and the spirit world. The Mingo, an Iroquoian-speaking people, shared elements of Haudenosaunee cosmology, including Thanksgiving rituals and belief in a three-layered spirit world. These nations sometimes shared hunting grounds, trade routes, and political alliances, but their religious beliefs were not identical. Each had its own ceremonies, sacred stories, and spiritual leaders. Their traditions shaped diplomacy, warfare, mourning practices, and responses to colonial expansion. Understanding this diversity helps us see the Ohio country not as a single cultural bloc, but as a region of rich, overlapping spiritual worlds.
Number 19. Did you know? Native religious beliefs in the Kentucky and Tennessee region were equally diverse, with Cherokee, Chickasaw, Shawnee, and other nations practicing distinct spiritual traditions tied to mountains, rivers, hunting grounds, and the powerful beings who governed the natural world.
Kentucky and Tennessee were shared spaces long before settlers arrived, used by multiple nations for hunting, travel, diplomacy, and warfare. The Cherokee held a complex religious system centered on balance, sacred fire, purification rituals, and powerful spirit beings such as the Thunderers and the Uktena. Their towns maintained sacred fires, and ceremonies like the Green Corn Festival renewed both community and land. The Chickasaw practiced a warrior-centered spiritual tradition emphasizing courage, honor, and ancestral guidance, with ceremonies tied to hunting, warfare, and clan identity. The Shawnee, who also traveled into Kentucky, brought their own belief system emphasizing harmony, sacred responsibility, and the guidance of spiritual forces connected to animals and the land. Smaller groups, including the Yuchi and various hunting parties from northern nations, carried their own traditions into the region as well. Though these nations sometimes shared hunting grounds, their religious beliefs were not the same. The Cherokee worldview was shaped by mountains and river valleys, the Chickasaw worldview by plains, warfare, and clan identity, the Shawnee worldview by mobility, balance, and sacred obligation. Kentucky and Tennessee were crossroads where different spiritual traditions overlapped, interacted, and sometimes clashed, making the region far more complex than simple one tribe versus settlers narratives.
Number 20. Did you know? Saw licks were some of the most important natural landmarks on the entire frontier, essential to wildlife, vital to native nations, and highly prized by hunters and frontier families who followed buffalo traces and animal trails straight to these mineral-rich sites.
Salt licks formed where mineral salts naturally surfaced from the ground, creating deposits that attracted enormous numbers of animals. Buffalo, elk, deer, bear, and smaller game traveled long distances to reach these sites, sometimes carving deep, wide trails through the forest over generations. These buffalo traces became the earliest highways of the interior, used by native nations for hunting and travel long before settlers arrived. For native communities, salt licks were places of abundant game, seasonal gathering, and strategic importance, often tied to hunting traditions, trade routes, and territorial boundaries. Frontier families quickly learned the same truth. Where there was salt, there was life. Hunters followed buffalo trails to salt licks to find game. Settlers gathered salt for preserving meat, and early explorers used these landmarks to map routes into Kentucky, Tennessee, and the Ohio country. Salt licks shaped migration, hunting, settlement, and even conflict. They were crossroads where animals, native nations, and frontier families converged, making them some of the most valuable and contested natural resources in early America.
Number 21. Did you know? Kentucky was once home to thousands of buffalo, and their disappearance reshaped the entire landscape, ending ancient migration routes, disrupting native hunting traditions, and removing one of the frontier's most important natural resources.
For thousands of years, buffalo, American bison, roamed Kentucky in large herds, traveling between salt licks, grazing grounds, and river valleys. Their massive bodies carved deep, wide trails through the forest, the famous buffalo traces, which later guided native hunters, long hunters, traders, and eventually frontier families into the interior. These herds were essential to native nations. The Shawnee, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and others relied on buffalo for meat, hides, tools, and ceremonial uses. When settlers arrived, they too depended on buffalo for food and followed their trails to reach salt licks, fertile valleys, and future settlement sites. But by the early 1800s, Kentucky's buffalo were gone. Several forces caused their disappearance. Overhunting. Frontier hunters killed buffalo in enormous numbers for meat, hides, and trade. Habitat loss. Settlers cleared forests, fenced fields, and built cabins directly across ancient migration routes. Salt lick pressure. Buffalo were slaughtered in large numbers at salt licks, where they gathered in predictable, vulnerable groups. Disrupted migration. As settlements expanded, herds could no longer move freely between grazing grounds. By the time Kentucky became a state in 1792, buffalo herds were already collapsing. Within a few decades, they vanished entirely from the region. Their disappearance ended the buffalo traces, altered native hunting patterns, and erased one of the most important natural forces shaping Kentucky's geography. The buffalo were not just animals. They were architects of the land, carving the very paths that settlers later used to enter the West. Their loss marked the end of an ancient world and the beginning of a new, rapidly changing frontier.
Number 22. Did you know? Kentucky and Tennessee were also scenes of intense intertribal conflict long before settlers arrived, with Cherokee, Chickasaw, Shawnee, and others battling over hunting rights, salt licks, and control of the buffalo traces that cut through the region.
Kentucky and Tennessee were not the homeland of a single nation, but a shared hunting territory, and that made them fiercely contested. The Cherokee and Chickasaw fought over access to river valleys and salt licks, while the Shawnee launched raids deep into the region to defend their seasonal hunting grounds. The Chickasaw, known for their warrior tradition, guarded the lower Tennessee Valley against northern incursions. The Cherokee defended the Cumberland Plateau and mountain passes that connected their towns to the interior. These conflicts were not random violence. They were part of long-standing systems of warfare, honor, and territorial defense. When white hunters eventually followed buffalo traces into Kentucky and Tennessee, they entered a land already shaped by centuries of native rivalry, diplomacy, and shifting control.
Number 23. Did you know? Kentucky and Tennessee entered the Union only a few years apart, but their paths to statehood were completely different, shaped by frontier settlement, territorial disputes, and the rapid growth of backcountry communities.
Kentucky became the 15th state on June 1, 1792, breaking away from Virginia after years of petitions, conventions, and debates over defense, land claims, and governance. Its booming population, fertile river valleys, and strategic location along the Ohio River made it one of the fastest-growing frontier regions in early America. By the early 1790s, Kentucky's leaders argued they needed their own government to manage land titles, militia defense, and relations with native nations. Congress agreed, and Kentucky became the first state admitted west of the Appalachians. Tennessee followed just 4 years later, becoming the 16th state on June 1, 1796. But its journey was far more complicated. The region had been part of North Carolina, then briefly the self-declared state of Franklin, and later a federally administered territory. Frontier settlements grew rapidly along the Cumberland and Tennessee rivers, and leaders pushed for full representation, legal stability, and protection from raids and territorial disputes. Once Congress determined the territory had enough population and organization, Tennessee was admitted as a state. Kentucky and Tennessee entered the Union almost side by side, but their stories reveal how different frontier regions navigated the challenges of settlement, governance, and identity in the early United States.
Number 24. Did you know? The backcountry was one of the most violent regions of the entire Revolutionary War, a place where raids, ambushes, cabin attacks, and retaliatory strikes created constant fear, turning the conflict into a deeply personal civil war that tore through families, neighbors, and entire communities.
The fighting in the backcountry was unlike the formal battles fought in the East. In frontier regions of the Carolinas, Georgia, Virginia, and the Appalachian Highlands, Patriot and Loyalist militias clashed in brutal, small-scale engagements that often erupted without warning. Homes were burned, livestock stolen, crops destroyed, and families attacked in the night. Loyalist raiders targeted Patriot households. Patriot militia retaliated with equal ferocity. Native nations, including the Cherokee, Shawnee, and Creek, launched raids to defend homelands threatened by illegal settlement, while settlers struck back, creating cycles of violence that lasted for years. This constant danger meant that every cabin, every isolated farm, and every settlement lived under the shadow of attack. Families slept lightly, kept rifles close, and relied on neighbors for defense. Children witnessed violence firsthand, and women often had to defend their homes when men were away with militia. In many areas, the revolution was not fought between distant armies, but between people who knew each other, former friends, relatives, and neighbors divided by loyalty. The backcountry became a patchwork of shifting alliances, personal grudges, and survival-driven decisions. For thousands of frontier families, the Revolutionary War was not a distant political struggle over taxes or parliament. It was a daily fight to protect their homes, their children, and their lives. A civil war within a larger war, where suffering touched every side and the cost of survival was paid in blood. Should men and families from the colonies have crossed the mountains into the Western countries? What do you think about the Battle of Kings Mountain? Please leave your thoughts and comments and be respectful of differing opinions. If you enjoyed this video or learned something, please like, share, and subscribe. There are many more videos coming about the history of North America and the United States of America. If you are a student or teacher and would like to look at the reflection and research questions, they are in the descriptions of the sister videos corresponding with each of these videos. There, the story is told by 4 animals and intended for a different audience than these videos. They can be found on the same channel, but on a parallel playlist. Many of those videos also include maps. Thanks for watching. We hope you come back for more. Keep learning, and remember, as said by George Santayana, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.